Hello, everyone. The morning started like any other. I rolled out of bed, careful not to wake my wife, Sarah. She had the uncanny ability to fall back asleep instantly, no matter what time she woke up. I envied that about her. After a quick shower, I glanced at myself in the mirror, noticing the weight loss that had become impossible to ignore. I had lost a lot more than just pounds. The vibrant energy that once characterized me had been sapped by something far more sinister. For weeks, I had been making secret trips to the hospital, hiding the truth from Sarah. I didn't want her to worry, to see the fear in my eyes. Each appointment was another battle in a war I was losing. The oncologist's words echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. We're monitoring it closely, but there's no guarantee. I had grown numb to those words until today. Are you leaving already? Sarah's voice brought me back to the present. She was sitting up in bed, her hair tousled from sleep, her eyes half closed as she adjusted to the morning light. Yeah, I've got an early meeting, I lied, forcing a smile. You know how it is. She smiled back, but there was something different in her expression, something that made me pause. But before I could figure out what it was, she yawned and said, I'm going to work in a few minutes too. I'll see you tonight, of course, I replied, leaning in to kiss her forehead. It felt like a routine, like we were playing roles in a script we didn't write. As I walked out of the bedroom, I felt a strange knot in my stomach, as if today would be different. I drove to the hospital, my mind a storm of thoughts I couldn't calm. The waiting room was as depressing as ever, filled with people clinging to hope like a lifeline. When the nurse called my name, I walked down the familiar hallway, past the same sterile walls, and into the room where the doctor waited. Dr. Evans greeted me with a somber nod. He was a good man, always straightforward, never sugarcoating the truth. Today, though, his eyes were darker, more serious. Tom, I'm afraid the news isn't good, he began, his voice low. The cancer is spreading rapidly. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but we're running out of options. I estimate you have about 40 days left. 40 days. It felt like a death sentence, a cruel joke. The room seemed to spin, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. I gripped the edge of the chair, trying to steady myself, trying to understand how my life had come to this point. I was only 42, still in the prime of my life, or so I thought. Is there really nothing more we can do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We can manage the pain, keep you as comfortable as possible. But Tom, I think it's time you start making preparations, having those conversations with your loved ones. I'm truly sorry. I left the hospital in a daze, the world outside seeming unreal, like I was watching it through a filter. My mind kept replaying those words, 40 days. How do you even begin to process something like that? All I knew was that I wasn't ready to die, and I sure as hell wasn't ready to tell Sarah. The plan had been to go to work after the appointment, like I always did, but something stopped me. A nagging feeling, an instinct I couldn't shake. Instead, I decided to go home, maybe just to clear my head before the inevitable conversation with Sarah. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Sarah's car still there. Strange. She should have been at work by now. I parked beside her car, wondering if she was sick or had simply decided to take the day off. But as I approached the front door, a new thought crept into my mind, a thought so dark, so unwelcome, that I nearly turned around. My hands shook as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that screams at you, that warns you something is wrong. I walked through the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then I heard a faint sound, almost like a murmur, coming from the bedroom. I moved closer, the noise growing clearer, more distinct. And when I finally pushed the door open, my world shattered. There was Sarah, lying in our bed, with another man. The scene was so surreal, so grotesque, that for a moment I thought I was dreaming. But this was no dream. It was a nightmare, one from which there was no waking. They didn't notice me at first, too caught up in their own betrayal. I stood there, frozen, unable to speak, unable to think. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but all I could do was watch as the life I thought I knew disintegrated before my eyes. Finally, Sarah looked up and saw me. Her expression went from pleasure to shock in an instant, her eyes wide with terror. The man, whoever he was, pulled away from her, scrambling to cover himself, his face a mask of fear. "Tom! Sarah stammered, her voice trembling, but I couldn't hear her. I couldn't hear anything over the roar in my head, the sound of my heart breaking, of my life ending in more ways than one. I had come home to die, but in that moment, it felt like I had already died. The cancer in my body was nothing compared to the cancer in my heart, a betrayal so deep, so vicious, that I wasn't sure I could survive it. And then, just like that, I turned around and walked out. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not in that house, not with her. The world outside was the same as it had been when I arrived, but everything had changed. I had 40 days to live, but at that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted any of them. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind a swirling vortex of anger, betrayal, and despair. The image of Sarah with that man was burned into my memory, an inescapable nightmare that played on a loop every time I closed my eyes. I had thought the worst thing that could happen to me was the cancer diagnosis, but I had been wrong. This betrayal was a new kind of pain, one that gnawed at my soul and left me hollow. Eventually, I found myself parked at a small, nondescript diner on the edge of town. I don't even remember how I got there. It was the kind of place where nobody asked questions, where you could lose yourself in a cup of coffee and pretend, just for a while, that the world outside didn't exist. I needed that right now. Inside, the place was nearly empty, just a few older folks scattered around, nursing their own quiet sorrows. I slid into a booth in the far corner, my back to the wall, and stared out the window at the gray sky. A waitress came by, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a tired smile. I ordered coffee, and she brought it without a word, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I sat there, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Why? Why would Sarah do this? We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I had always believed we were strong, that our love was real. How could I have been so blind? And why now, of all times, when I needed her the most? The questions swirled in my mind, but no answers came. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was a lie, and the woman I thought I knew was a stranger. I should have seen the signs, I told myself, should have known something was wrong. But I had been too consumed with my own battle, too focused on keeping my secret, to notice hers. I remembered the look on her face when I caught her, how it twisted from pleasure to horror in an instant. She had looked at me like she was the one who had been betrayed, like I had done something wrong. The memory of it made my blood boil, and I gripped the coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. 40 days. I muttered to myself, the words feeling like a curse. 40 days to live, and now I had to spend them knowing that the woman I loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way. What was I supposed to do with that? How was I supposed to face her, to live in the same house with her, knowing what I knew? But I had no choice. I couldn't just leave. I couldn't just disappear. Despite everything, part of me still loved her, still clung to the memories of our life together. But those memories were tainted now, corrupted by the image of her with another man. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, but I knew I needed answers. I needed to know why. I tossed some money on the table and left the diner, the coffee untouched. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of what I would say, of how I would confront her. But when I pulled into the driveway, her car was gone. The house stood silent, empty, and I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of her perfume, a lingering reminder of what I had seen. I wandered through the house, aimless, lost. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of our life together, photos of us on vacation, the souvenirs from trips we had taken, the little trinkets she loved to collect. It all felt like a mockery now, a cruel joke. I found myself in the bedroom, standing at the foot of the bed where I had caught them. The sheets were rumpled, the pillows askew. The scene was so ordinary, so mundane, but it felt like a crime scene. I wanted to burn the bed, to erase every trace of what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just stood there, staring, until I felt something wet on my face. It took me a moment to realize I was crying. The tears came in a torrent, and before I knew it, I was on my knees, sobbing into the sheets, clutching them like they could somehow make it all go away. The pain was overwhelming, suffocating, and I didn't know how to handle it. I had always been strong, the one who kept it together, but now I was broken. I don't know how long I stayed there, crying like a child. Time seemed to lose meaning. All I knew was that when I finally stopped, I was exhausted, empty. The anger had drained out of me, leaving only a deep, aching sadness. I had 40 days left, and I had already wasted one of them in this misery. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and let the days slip away. I needed to confront Sarah, to make her explain herself. But more than that, I needed to decide what I was going to do with the time I had left. Did I want to spend it fighting, wallowing in betrayal? Or was there still a chance, however slim, to find some peace before the end? I forced myself to get up, to wash my face, to clear my mind. I couldn't control what Sarah had done, but I could control how I responded to it. I had to think clearly, to make a plan. But first, I needed to find her, to hear her side of the story, even if I knew it would tear me apart all over again. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed her number. It rang twice before going to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I say that would make any sense of this? Instead, I sent a text, "We need to talk. Come home." The minutes ticked by like hours, and I paced the living room, my mind racing with 1,000 scenarios. Maybe she would deny it, try to lie her way out of it. Maybe she would confess, beg for forgiveness. Or maybe she wouldn't come home at all. The possibilities were endless, and none of them were good. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of her car in the driveway. My heart leapt into my throat, and I had to force myself to stay calm. I had to stay in control. This was my moment, my chance to get the answers I needed. The door opened, and she walked in, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She knew why I had called her home. She knew there was no escaping what was coming. "Tom," she began, her voice trembling, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice cold, detached. "Just tell me why." She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears, and I knew then that whatever she was about to say would change everything. There would be no going back after this. And as much as I hated it, I needed to hear it. I needed to know why she had betrayed me. But as she opened her mouth to speak, I realized that no answer she could give would ever be enough. The damage was done, and the clock was ticking down on the little time I had left. Sarah stood in front of me, her eyes shimmering with tears, but I wasn't moved by her emotion. If anything, it made me angrier, like she was the one who had been wronged. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating, and I could feel the tension pulling tighter with every passing second. "Why, Sarah?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper but laced with all the hurt and betrayal I felt. "Why did you do it?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think, Tom. I never wanted to hurt you. She faltered, and the frustration inside me surged. "Don't tell me what you didn't want," I snapped, cutting her off. "Tell me why you did it. Why him? Why now? You owe me that much." She swallowed hard, and when she finally spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for a long time. "You've been so distant, Tom. Ever since you got sick, you've shut me out. I didn't even know how bad it was until I overheard you talking to your doctor one night. You didn't tell me anything, and I felt like I was losing you. I didn't know what to do." My heart sank as her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She knew. She had known all along about my cancer, about the struggle I had been trying to keep from her. And instead of coming to me, instead of talking to me, she had turned to someone else. The betrayal stung even more knowing that she had been aware of my illness. "You knew?" I asked, my voice shaking. You knew, and you still did this? I was scared, Tom, she cried, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to handle it. I felt like you were already gone, like I was losing you, and I was so lonely. I know it's no excuse, but I felt so alone. And then Greg was there, and he listened, and Greg. I spat the name out like it was poison. Who is he, Sarah? How long has this been going on? Her silence was all the answer I needed. She looked away, biting her lip, as if the truth was too painful to admit. But I pressed on, needing to know the extent of her betrayal. How long? I repeated, more forcefully this time. A few months, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. It wasn't supposed to happen, Tom. It just did. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. A few months. All that time, while I was fighting for my life, she had been sneaking around with another man. The realization made me feel sick to my stomach. And you didn't think to tell me? I asked, my voice thick with sarcasm. You didn't think I deserved to know that my wife was cheating on me? She flinched at my words, but she didn't respond. Her silence spoke volumes, and I knew that she had no defense. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and there was no justification for what she had done. I don't know what's worse, I said, more to myself than to her. The fact that you cheated, or the fact that you did it while knowing I'm dying. The weight of those words hung in the air, and I saw Sarah's face crumple as she began to sob. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. Not after everything she had done. I didn't know how to handle it, she whispered through her tears. I was so scared, Tom. I didn't know how to be there for you when you wouldn't let me in, and so you turned to him. I said bitterly, the pain in my chest growing sharper by the second. Was it worth it, Sarah? Did he make you feel better? Did he make you forget about the husband you were losing? No, she cried, shaking her head. It wasn't like that. I was wrong, Tom. I know I was wrong, but I didn't know how to fix things with you. I felt like I had already lost you, and I didn't know what else to do. I stared at her, my mind reeling. It was true that I had kept my illness a secret, that I had tried to shield her from the worst of it. But I had done it out of love, out of a desire to protect her from the pain I was going through. And in return, she had betrayed me. Do you love him? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I hated myself for asking. But I needed to know. I needed to understand if this was something deeper, something that had been festering for longer than I realized. No, she answered quickly, shaking her head. No, Tom. It was never about love. It was just a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake. I wanted to believe her, but the trust between us had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, had broken me in ways I didn't think were possible. And now, with my time running out, I didn't know what to do. I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah, I said finally, my voice hollow. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. She sobbed harder, her whole body shaking with the force of it. I'm so sorry, Tom. Please, just give me a chance to make it right. I don't want to lose you. I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. Was it pity? Regret? Whatever it was, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. You already lost me, I said quietly, the words like a dagger to my own heart. You lost me the moment you chose him. The room fell silent, the only sound Sarah's soft sobs. I felt like I was suffocating, the walls closing in on me. I needed to get out, to escape the toxic air that filled the space between us. I need some time, I said, backing away from her. I can't be here right now. I need to think. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sarah standing there alone. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, not sure where I was going, only knowing that I couldn't stay there. As I drove away, my mind was a chaotic mess of thoughts and emotions. The woman I had loved for so long was now a stranger to me, and I didn't know how to reconcile the life we had built with the betrayal she had committed. But as I drove, a new thought began to take shape in my mind, a dangerous, vengeful thought that both terrified and exhilarated me. Maybe I didn't have to reconcile it. Maybe, with the little time I had left, I could do something drastic, something that would make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. It was then that the idea hit me, clear and sharp, like a bolt of lightning. It was reckless, it was risky, and it might just destroy us both. But in that moment I didn't care. I wanted revenge, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. With my heart pounding and my mind racing, I made a decision that would change everything. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sarah had started this, but I was going to finish it. And by the time I was done, she would regret every single moment of her betrayal. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stepped out of the car. I had been driving aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my mind, but the storm of emotions inside me refused to settle. Anger, sadness, betrayal, they all churned together, leaving me exhausted but unable to rest. The thought of going back to that house, to Sarah, was unbearable. I needed distance, space to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I found myself at the edge of town, parked outside a familiar bar that I hadn't visited in years. It was a place I used to frequent before I met Sarah, back when life was simpler, less complicated. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open and walked inside. The bar was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale beer and cigarette smoke. It was a far cry from the upscale places Sarah and I used to go, but that was exactly why I was here. I needed something raw, something real, to match the turmoil inside me. The bartender, a burly man with a graying beard, nodded at me as I took a seat at the bar. "What'll it be?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Whiskey," I replied, my voice flat. "Keep them coming." He poured the drink without a word, sliding it across the bar to me. I took a long, burning sip, welcoming the warmth as it spread through my chest. For a moment, I closed my eyes, trying to lose myself in the numbness, but the thoughts of Sarah and Greg wouldn't leave me alone. The bar was quiet, just a handful of patrons scattered around, lost in their own worlds. I stared into my glass, the whiskey swirling like the thoughts in my mind. I kept replaying the conversation with Sarah over and over, her tearful confession, her desperate apologies. But no matter how many times I went over it, I couldn't find any peace. The wound was too deep, too raw, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to make her pay for what she had done. But how? How could I hurt her the way she had hurt me? The idea of revenge had taken root in my mind, refusing to let go. I wanted her to feel the same pain, the same betrayal, but I knew that whatever I did, it wouldn't change the fact that I was dying. That I was running out of time. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the bar door opening. I looked up to see a woman walk in, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. She was beautiful in a stark, almost dangerous way, tall, with long dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut through the dim light. She glanced around the bar, her gaze settling on me for just a moment before she took a seat at the far end. I couldn't take my eyes off her. There was something about the way she moved, the way she carried herself, that drew me in. She ordered a drink, her voice low and husky, and I found myself watching her every move, trying to figure out what it was about her that intrigued me so much. And then it hit me. She was everything Sarah wasn't: confident, mysterious, untouchable. She represented the life I could have had, the person I might have been if things had turned out differently. But more than that, she was an escape, a way out of the misery that was consuming me. Before I knew it, I had moved to the seat next to hers, my drink in hand. "Can I buy you a drink?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she were sizing me up. After a moment, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Why not?" she replied, her voice smooth as silk. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily despite the darkness hanging over me. Her name was Megan, and she was in town for a few days on business, staying at a hotel nearby. She didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't offer much about myself. It was perfect an escape from reality, from the pain of everything that had happened. For a while, I could forget about Sarah, forget about the cancer, and just be someone else, someone who wasn't dying and betrayed. As the night wore on, the drinks flowed more freely, and I found myself leaning closer to Megan, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. There was an electricity between us, a spark that I hadn't felt in years. She was flirtatious, teasing, but there was something else in her eyes, something dark, like she knew exactly what I was going through. "Let's get out of here," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. It was like someone flipped a switch in my mind. The idea of going with her, of spending the night with someone who didn't know me, who didn't know my pain, was intoxicating. It was the perfect way to hurt Sarah, to show her that she wasn't the only one who could betray our marriage. But as I stood up to follow Megan, something inside me pulled back. This wasn't me. This wasn't who I was. And as much as I wanted to hurt Sarah, to make her pay, I knew that sleeping with Megan wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't make the pain go away, and it wouldn't bring me any peace. I hesitated, and Megan must have seen the conflict in my eyes because she smiled, a sad, understanding smile. "You're not ready," she said softly, and it wasn't a question. I shook my head, the anger and frustration bubbling up inside me again. "No, it's not that. I can't." She reached out, placing a hand on my arm, and the touch was surprisingly gentle. "It's okay," she said, her voice full of empathy. "You don't have to explain. Just remember that you're still alive, and you deserve to be happy." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on the pain, on the betrayal, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be happy, to feel alive. Megan was offering me something that I had lost a chance to feel again, to connect with someone, even if it was only for one night. But as much as I wanted to take it, I knew I couldn't. "Thank you," I said, pulling away from her. "But I need to figure some things out first." She nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "Take care of yourself, Tom. You deserve better than what you're going through." With that, she turned and walked out of the bar, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat back down at the bar, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had come so close to doing something that I knew would only make things worse, something that would have destroyed what little dignity I had left. I knew then that revenge wasn't the answer. Hurting Sarah wouldn't take away the pain, and it wouldn't change the fact that I was dying. What I needed was closure, not revenge. I needed to confront Sarah again, to talk to her, and decide once and for all what I was going to do with the time I had left. It was time to stop running, to stop hiding from the truth. I had to face it head on, no matter how much it hurt. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to make peace with it all before the end. I finished my drink and left the bar, the night air cool against my skin. As I drove home, the darkness that had been suffocating me started to lift, just a little. I didn't know what was going to happen when I saw Sarah again, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let this break me. Not now, not when I had so little time left. And as I pulled into the driveway, I knew that whatever happened next, I was ready for it. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how painful, and find a way to move forward, whether that was with Sarah or without her. The house felt colder than usual as I stepped inside. Maybe it was the knowledge of what had happened there, or maybe it was just the chill in the air, but either way, I felt uneasy. Sarah was waiting for me in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wide and red from crying. "Tom, she began, but I cut her off. "I don't need more apologies, Sarah. I need the truth. All of it." She nodded, swallowing hard. I could see she was terrified, and for the first time in days I realized I wasn't the only one suffering. But that didn't change what she'd done. "I was scared, Tom," she started, her voice shaking. "I was scared of losing you. You've been so distant, and I didn't know why. I felt like you were slipping away from me, And I didn't know how to reach you, so you turned to someone else. I said, more as a statement than a question. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Yes, she admitted, her eyes dropping to the floor. I know it was wrong, but I was desperate. Greg, he was there. He listened. And it just happened, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You don't accidentally fall into bed with someone, Sarah. You made a choice. She winced, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was on them. I know, she whispered. And I hate myself for it. But I was hurting, Tom. I felt so alone, and I didn't know how to handle it. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this broken woman in front of me with the one I had loved for so many years. She had always been strong, or at least that's how I saw her. But now, she was a mess of guilt and fear, and it was hard to believe this was the same person I'd shared my life with. Do you still love him? The question slipped out before I could stop it. No, she said immediately, looking up at me with desperation in her eyes. It was never about love. It was about filling a void. I was lost, and he was just there. I shook my head, the anger and sadness bubbling up inside me. You betrayed me, Sarah. You betrayed us. And now, with everything going on, I don't know how to move past this. She started crying again, silent tears that only made me feel worse. I don't expect you to forgive me, Tom. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I'm begging you, please don't give up on us. Don't let this be the end. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hold on to the love we had, to the life we had built together. But the image of her with Greg kept flashing in my mind, taunting me, reminding me that things would never be the same. I'm leaving for a few days, I said suddenly, the decision forming as the words left my mouth. I need time to think, to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. Tom, please I need space, Sarah, I said firmly. I can't breathe in here, and I need to get my head straight. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, but she didn't argue. She knew she'd lost the right to fight for anything right now. As I packed a bag, I thought about what she had said. I thought about the years we had spent together, the good times and the bad. And I thought about the man I was now, a man with an expiration date. A man who didn't have time to waste on anger and revenge, but who also didn't know how to forgive. When I walked out the door, Sarah didn't try to stop me. She just watched with tear-filled eyes, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. I wanted to say something, anything to ease the tension, but the words wouldn't come. I got in the car and drove away, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed to get as far from that house as possible. The city lights blurred past as I drove aimlessly, my thoughts as scattered as the streets I was navigating. Eventually, I found myself at a small hotel on the outskirts of town. It was nothing special, just a place to crash for the night, but it felt like a refuge. I checked in, lugged my bag up to the room, and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. This wasn't how I imagined spending my last days alone in a cheap hotel room, my marriage in shambles. But this was my reality now, and I had to figure out how to deal with it. I thought about Sarah, about the life we had shared and the future we had once imagined. I thought about the good times, the laughter, the love. But all of that seemed so far away now, buried under layers of pain and betrayal. The truth was, I still loved her. Despite everything, despite the hurt and the anger, I couldn't just turn that off. But I didn't know if that was enough to get us through this. As I lay there in the dark, the weight of it all pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I had 40 days left to live, 40 days to decide whether I wanted to spend them trying to salvage what was left of my marriage or walking away from it all. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have a clue what to do next. The hotel room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the thin curtains. I'd been staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours, my mind a chaotic mess of thoughts and emotions. I hadn't moved much since I arrived, just lying there, trying to make sense of everything. The weight of it all, Sarah's betrayal, my illness, the limited time I had left, it was almost too much to bear. I reached for my phone, scrolling aimlessly through messages and missed calls. Sarah had called a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What would I say? What was left to say? I kept turning it all over in my mind, replaying the moments that had led us here. But no matter how much I thought about it, I kept coming back to the same question: what now? In the quiet of that hotel room, I realized something that I hadn't fully confronted until that moment. I didn't want to spend my last days consumed by anger and hurt. I didn't want to die with bitterness in my heart, carrying the weight of what Sarah had done. I wanted peace, or at least as close to it as I could get. The truth was, I still loved her. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lies, and the pain, I loved Sarah. But that love was tangled up with so much else: disappointment, anger, confusion that I didn't know if it could survive. And with time running out, I had to make a choice. I sat up, the bed creaking under my weight, and ran a hand through my hair. The night stretched on, and I knew I couldn't stay in that room forever. I had to go back. I had to face her, face this mess we'd made of our lives, and decide what came next. The drive home was quiet, the streets mostly empty, as the city slept. My thoughts were clearer than they'd been in days, the fog of anger lifting just enough for me to see what I needed to do. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed that the house was dark, but a soft light glowed in the living room. Sarah was waiting. I stood at the door for a moment, gathering my thoughts, before finally pushing it open. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that felt heavy with anticipation. As I walked into the living room, I found Sarah sitting on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up when I entered, her eyes wide and full of uncertainty. "Tom," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't know if you were coming back." "I didn't either," I replied honestly, sitting down in the chair opposite her. The room felt colder than usual, or maybe that was just the chill in my heart. "We need to talk, Sarah. For real this time." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "I'm so sorry, Tom. For everything. I don't even know where to begin. I've been thinking a lot," I said, cutting her off before she could start with more apologies. "And I need to know, do you really want to save this? Or are we just holding on because we're too scared to let go?" She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for some sign of hope. "I don't want to lose you, Tom. I know I messed up in the worst way possible, but I still love you. I never stopped loving you." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the sincerity in them. But love wasn't always enough. I knew that now more than ever. "I love you too, Sarah," I admitted, the words feeling both heavy and light at the same time. "But I'm not sure that's enough anymore. What you did, it broke something inside me. And I don't know if I can put it back together." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked away, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of my words was too much to bear. "I know, Tom. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to try. I want to spend whatever time we have left making it right, if you'll let me." I looked at her, this woman I had loved for so long, who had been my partner, my confidant, my everything. And I realized that while the hurt ran deep, so did the love. Maybe it was broken, maybe it was scarred, but it was still there, stubbornly refusing to die. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "But I don't want to spend the rest of my life, however short it might be, hating you. I don't want to die with that kind of anger in my heart." She nodded, tears spilling over and running down her cheeks. "I understand. And I'll wait, Tom. I'll wait as long as it takes. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not giving up on us." I stood up, crossing the room to sit beside her. I took her hand in mine, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of warmth. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And that was something. "We'll take it one day at a time," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can find our way back to each other." She looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear, but she nodded, her grip on my hand tightening. "One day at a time," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. We sat there in the quiet of the living room, the past hanging heavily between us, but with a tentative hope for the future. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and it didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. But it was a step forward, a chance to see if we could rebuild what had been broken. I didn't know if we would make it, if we would find a way to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. But as I sat there with Sarah, I realized that I wasn't ready to give up just yet. We had come too far, been through too much, to walk away without trying. And maybe, just maybe, in the time I had left, we could find some kind of peace together. The days that followed were a strange mix of tension and tentative hope. Sarah and I moved carefully around each other, like we were both afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. It was almost like we were strangers again, trying to figure out how to navigate a relationship that had been shattered and patched together with fragile threads. I kept my distance, both physically and emotionally. It wasn't intentional. It was just that every time I looked at her, I saw flashes of what she'd done, the image of her and Greg burned into my mind. But underneath that, there was also the woman I had loved for so many years, the one I had shared my life with. I was torn between those two versions of Sarah, not knowing which one to hold on to. One evening, about a week after I had come back, we sat down to dinner together. It was a simple meal, soup and bread, nothing fancy, but it felt like an important step. We ate in near silence, the sound of our spoons clinking against the bowls the only noise in the room. After a while, Sarah put down her spoon and looked at me with those eyes that had always been able to see right through me. "Tom," she said, her voice soft, "I need to know, do you think we can make it through this? I mean, really make it?" I set my spoon down, considering her question. I didn't have an easy answer for her, because the truth was, I didn't know. I wanted to believe we could, but the hurt was still there, a persistent ache that hadn't gone away. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice low. "I want to say yes, but I'm not sure. It's not something that can be fixed overnight, Sarah. What you did, it changed everything." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know it did. And I know I can't take it back, no matter how much I wish I could. But I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I'll go to counseling, I'll give you space, whatever you need. I just don't want to lose you." Her words were sincere, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. She was scared of losing me, scared of what her actions had done to us. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe we could find a way through this, one step at a time. I started, searching for the right words. "I think we have to start over. From the beginning. I don't want to pretend like nothing happened, because it did, and it hurt. But if we're going to make this work, we have to rebuild piece by piece. And that's going to take time." Sarah reached across the table and took my hand in hers. Her touch was warm, familiar, but there was a hesitancy in it now, like she wasn't sure if I'd pull away. "I'm here, Tom. I'm here for whatever it takes. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it if you'll let me." I squeezed her hand gently, a small gesture, but it felt like a huge step. "One day at a time." I repeated the words we'd agreed on before. "We'll take it one day at a time, and see where it leads." Her face softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a genuine smile, small, tentative, but real. It was like a glimpse of the Sarah I used to know, the one I had fallen in love with. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us after all. The days continued to pass, and little by little, we started to find a rhythm again. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but there were moments of normalcy, of connection. We talked more, about things that mattered and things that didn't. We took walks together, sat quietly on the porch in the evenings, just being in each other's presence without the need for words. One night, as we sat outside watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah turned to me and said, "Tom, I don't want to spend the rest of your time with us in sorrow. I want to make the most of it." "What do you want to do? What's something you've always wanted but never did?" I thought about it for a moment, realizing I had been so wrapped up in the hurt that I hadn't even considered what I wanted to do with the time I had left. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've always been so focused on work, on responsibilities, that I never really thought about it. Well, maybe it's time to start, she said gently, her hand finding mine again. We can do anything, Tom. We still have time. That night, lying in bed, I thought about her words. There was still time. Time to try and find peace with Sarah, time to forgive, or at least to start the process. Time to live, even if only for a little while longer. And maybe that was the real gift, the realization that even in the midst of all the pain, life was still happening. I was still here. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I told Sarah that I wanted to take a trip, just the two of us, to somewhere we'd never been. It didn't matter where, as long as it was a place where we could escape, even if only for a little while. She agreed immediately, a look of relief and hope crossing her face. And within a week, we were on a plane, flying to a small, quiet beach town on the coast, a place where we could leave the world behind and just be together. The days we spent there were a blur of sun, sand, and laughter. We talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding the connection we had lost, bit by bit. There were still moments of sadness, of doubt, but they were outweighed by the simple joy of being together, of sharing these precious moments. One evening, as we sat on the beach watching the waves roll in, Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you, Tom, for giving us a chance." I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. "Thank you for being here," I replied softly. "For not giving up." As the sun set, casting a warm, golden glow over the ocean, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a step toward it. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a sense of peace. We would never be the same as we were before, and I didn't know how much time we had left together. But I knew that whatever happened, we had chosen to face it together. And in the end, that was enough. As the last light faded from the sky, I took Sarah's hand and held it tightly, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. And in that moment I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it side by side. One day at a time. Bye, everyone.